Senge Herende, as we say in Tewa. As I was presented, my name is Greg Cajete. I'm director of the Native American Studies program at the University of New Mexico. I've been an educator for about 41 years, and along with being director of Native Studies, I'm also in the language, literacy, and social cultural studies program at the university. And in some ways, I feel like, my presentation on technology has already been made, because we tend to, use technology, and it works beautifully when it works, but when it's not working, it's not working. And so there's a metaphor, I guess, to be learned in that. But what I want to talk to you about today, and it really is a very, very big pleasure to have the opportunity to address this institute, is to look at how technology can be used within the context of comprehensive curriculum planning. I know that my experience has been, with regard to language programs and also with regard to the use of technology, that they're both wonderful in terms of intent, and many kinds of things have been done in terms of technology materials, media types of curriculum materials, but many times they are not as effective as they can be because of the way in which they are presented, or the context, or the, if you will, the curriculum that is used to deliver them. And so that while we have these great technologies that we can use in terms of language acquisition, and that's becoming more pronounced as we speak with advancements in technologies, I'm kind of the old school. I believe that it's good planning that actually makes the difference. Depending on what tools that you use and have at your disposal, but it's really the planning that goes behind that language instruction, the planning that takes long and hard discussions and reflections about what you're going to teach and why you're going to teach it and how you're going to teach it, and the kinds of contexts of activities, the audiences that you're going to be addressing with regard to your language instructional program. So I'm one of those people that really says, learn your basics, understand that all learning happens within a greater context, and that the planning really does make a difference. And so for educators, we use this term curriculum, which really comes from the Latin and means the circle. It's actually coming from a Latin word that says that talks about the racetrack, because the Romans used to have these chariot races around in this big circle, and so that's where curricula comes from. So what I want to do really this morning is really introduce you to that whole notion of how you go about planning for the most effective use of whatever tools you have, whether they're tools that include, technology, the people, the places that you're using as, the focus of your language instruction, and all of those kinds of concerns. So I'm hoping that Ani will make this, and I think she will, make this this PowerPoint available to those of you that request it. But I just want to sort of start with a brief history. And again, I'm drawing from, the work of this institute, also some of the work that I've been involved with the ALDI program at the University of Arizona, the American Indian Language Development Institute, that I've had the opportunity to work with over the years since it was started. And also introduce, this whole notion, or this whole idea of good curriculum planning. Also, Ani and the Indigenous Language Institute, as well as some other people at the University of Arizona who have done work with technology and language, Susan Penfield in particular. So I want to just sort of draw from their work, but also add to it some of the work that I've been doing over these many, many years, as a director of Native Studies and also as a professor within the College of Education at the University of New Mexico. You know, we have some hard realities, of course, that we face, and these are actually somewhat dated statistics, 1998, of 201 indigenous languages in the US and Canada. By 2060, all but 20 will be extinct. And those figures are probably somewhat conservative because language loss, especially in some communities under some circumstances, is actually much more rapid. So the ideal measure of success has been strong immersion programs which promote real fluency, especially among youth. But this ideal is becoming increasingly difficult to attain. And so, you know, the ideal is to immerse people in the language, use it in school, use it use it at home, use it in different kinds of contexts, as have been demonstrated by the Maoris and the Hawaiians in terms of the work that they've done in terms of creating these immersion programs. But, you know, the reality is that that's really difficult to do. That takes an enormous amount of organization, follow-up, even just to create those basic schools that have an immersion as the focus. Most Native communities don't have the resources, don't have many times the access really to you know, that kind of curriculum and that kind of intense teamwork that's required. So, you know, that then allows for, I think, some real thinking about what can you do if you don't have those resources, if you don't have that kind of organization, you know, required to do comprehensive immersion language programming. So I'm hoping that some thoughts, you know, that come forward, because technology now is actually fairly easy to use. We have a lot of different kinds of new methods of using technology, new expressions of technology. I'm one of the school that, you know, I always thought that language should be learned at home and within the context of community and the context of family. But then, you know, I have to also face the reality as a professor of young people, and also watching young people in their schools and in their classrooms, that they don't learn traditionally the way that I did. They don't learn the language traditionally. They are very focused and learn through this medium that we call technology and all of its many expressions. So as a teacher, I have to face that reality. I have to face the reality that the young people learn differently than I learned, and that I have to now begin to develop and see what kinds of technologies, what kinds of methods I can use, you know, to begin to engage young people today in the kind of learning that is necessary for language instruction. And so that's where I then now say technology is a tool that we can use. It's something that we can learn to use. As it turns out, our young people have a great facility of learning technology much quicker than I do, or maybe the rest of us do. They can learn things, and what's important and interesting is that when you give them the opportunity actually to create language curriculum using technology, they learn both the technology and the language at the same time. And so there's a very interesting kind of phenomena among young people as you begin to engage them in the use of technology and in actually creating curriculum, media materials, as well as curriculum materials that then can be used within the community in different kinds of contexts. So we're just beginning to understand how technology as a context, not just as a tool, but as a context within curriculum actually becomes very important and very useful, and we can make it effective through good curriculum planning. So there's a lot of current models for using technology with Indigenous language. One is called Capacity Technology Training. It's for building that capacity in the use of technology forms that are compatible with language teaching strategies. So a lot of the work that happens in ALDI these days is, they take the groups of different language instructors and they help them to understand how that technology works, how to create basic lessons using technology, and then they explore different ways of doing lessons, using technology assisted language instruction. So that's been one model that's been used quite often. The creation of curriculum materials in 3 modes of multimedia: text, audio, and graphics. And the creative blending of these modes can best be achieved through good curriculum design. So that our technologies now, with regard to animation, with regard to capturing audio, with regard to weaving together both audio and PowerPoint, as well as a variety of other kinds of ways to make the learning of a language, the learning of a vocabulary very engaging. For a long time, that was very expensive, to do, because that really required a lot of focus on computer programmers and a variety of other kinds of technical assistance. Again, that expense, is something that a lot of tribes, a lot of communities just don't have access to. But I have to say that within the last few years, that technology has advanced to such a point where if someone puts the time and energy and effort, usually young people, younger college students, are game for this. They can create some amazing kinds of curriculum materials that are very, very engaging and that are very specifically tailored to the needs of different language programs, different language initiatives. So I'm really encouraging really the development of collaborations, especially with interested college students that have that facility of use of technology. Their learning curve, they can learn programs really quickly and actually be on the ground creating curriculum materials almost within a month's time. And so it's really about, now creating a plan that really works for that language instruction for that community. And so, that's one of the things that we really need to think about. Creation of computer-based curriculum materials can be used in self-instruction, social media, or supported, or as support for existing language classes. What's interesting is when you engage a young person in, creating curriculum materials, they're learning the language, because you have to begin to understand the terms, you have to be able to write it or depict it or say it. And in that process of creating the materials, the students are also learning the language. So later on, they actually become some really, really good language instructors. And that's another thing that we have to begin to really think about is, as older instructors that we may be, we have to, in a sense, begin to create who's going to follow after us, in terms of the next language teachers. And of course, that pool is really, I think, those students that are going to college, that are getting, language background, and that want to do this kind of work. And we do actually have a lot of Native students that are interested in doing just that. So, support of tailored computer-assisted multimedia instruction under the control of the tribe and community. I know a lot of tribes have commissioned, programmers to actually create, these language programs for them. And I think that's fine. I mean, if you have the money to do that, because, you bring in professionals to actually do all of the kinds of things that are necessary and you use that material. But I think it's much more innovative when the community learns members of the community, young people in the community learn how to do this themselves and begin to produce, very, very tailored, very specific kinds of curriculum material that, of course, are tailored, to the needs of the tribe and also under the control of the tribe and the community. Because, in some cases, when you have a computer program done by a professional group, unless there's some real specific language about copyright, they actually can copyright some of your materials. And the same thing is true with the universities. So, those are issues that I think we can begin to address as we look at these kinds of questions. Many Indigenous youth have grown up in the age of technology. Many Indigenous youth have skills in the use of technology and computer-based tools. The instruction today, it's really interesting at the University of New Mexico. I came to work there 21 years ago from working at the IIA in Santa Fe. And I've seen gradually how computers have basically taken over almost all kinds of instruction that we do at the university level, including now online courses and fully, hybrid courses, a variety of different combinations where technology is intimately involved with the instruction. So even within the university, there's been a major transformation in terms of how computers are used, in all sorts of learning, all sorts of course development. Many Indigenous youth use social media extensively. There's new technologies now that allow for applications to be created that are very language specific that you can download on your phone. And many students are beginning to do that kind of both programming and also are accessing information, including language in that kind of way. So this whole notion, you see young people with phones all the time, either listening to music, and so that whole area of creating apps, language apps that can be used in that kind of medium, I think is very, very important to explore. Again, remember a few years ago, I was not, because I am in some sense very conservative about language education, and so I'm always emphasizing these things as support, but it's always the person-to-person relationship that you should not lose sight of. In other words, learning directly from other people, as opposed to just technology. So there's a balance also that you have to keep in mind, as you use technology. In other words, don't cut out the person-to-person, what we call the affective dimension of language learning. So many Indigenous youth prefer media-based learning over traditional forms of instruction. Many Indigenous youth have creative abilities related to developing multimedia curriculum, as I said, and many Indigenous youth want to take a proactive part in the revitalization of their language. So this is a way to begin to really fully engage them in this kind of work. So this goes back to, how do you plan for all of this? Well, what are the components of curriculum? Most curriculum include, a set of aims, goals, and objectives, a focus on kind of subject matter that you want to teach, learning experiences, and approaches to evaluation. That dear dancer is, as Indian people, we have curriculum. It comes out in the forms of our dances, in the forms of our music. It's just, as you learn how to do a dance, or as you learn the songs that go with a dance, all of those things, are what could be called the result, the outcome, of a whole process of learning that includes the whole community and includes language, includes the stories, includes a sense of the culture. So curriculum actually, when you talk about it in those terms, is not a foreign term really for Native people. We've been doing it all along, but we've been doing it in a different kind of way. So think about that, when you think about curriculum. So the basics, what are the foundations? For example, these are some examples of kinds of curriculum that, that you can think about and how curriculum connects to, or language curriculum can connect to other needs within the community. So, you know, we're used to creating, you know, just basic curriculum that, you know, brings forward, you know, basic words, maybe how to write them if the language is written. But rarely do we think about how the curriculum and how the learning of language is connected to other aspects of our community that need attention. And so it's actually possible to create language instruction, language curriculum that actually focuses on issues of the day within the community, needs of the community. And so that's what we call contexting the language curriculum. So that it's not just a series of words that you're learning, but those words are then connected to stories or connected to thoughts and perspectives that are important to the community as a whole. So also what's happening today in terms of this comprehensive curriculum is how do you teach Indigenous values through language instruction? Because we know that language is connected to you know, our sense for community, our core values, our sense for our culture, our tradition, our stories. And many times, but what happens many times is that the language instruction is kind of isolated over here. It's a group of vocabularies, you know, some terms. We sort of leave it up to the speakers or to the instructors to sort of connect it to different relevant aspects of their life. But what's important is that we begin to think of how to teach these other aspects of community through the language instruction. And that can be done through you know, good curriculum planning. So what are the foundations of leadership, service, community, values in Indigenous education? These are some of the kinds of themes that actually can be used for lessons within the context of creating you know, multimedia representations of these thoughts or these ideas or these themes in language learning. How can we incorporate the values into native language curriculum? How do we incorporate those values, you know? Because when you're teaching a language, what are you teaching about, you know, if not the culture, the tradition, the stories, the importance of certain core values. And so what I'm saying is that, that, you know, for a long time we've been sort of looking at language as kind of this isolated activity, you know, that happens at certain times, and then there's the other curriculum that's over here somewhere, and then there's the community over there with its needs and perspectives. And what I'm saying is that through good curriculum planning, you can connect all of those and actually enhance the understanding and the context of the language learning that's happening within schools. So what would be the role of, you know, stories, metaphor, and other communal knowledge in such a curriculum? These are questions, okay? So one of the first things you do when you begin to think about how to create comprehensive curriculum is that you ask these kinds of questions, you know, whether it's appropriate or not to bring in certain thoughts and ideas and perspectives about the culture, the tradition, the community. So as you're thinking about them, you know, and discussing them, out of that, you know, grows this kind of organic curriculum. Another question, how do we create culturally relevant and appropriate bilingual curriculum? Because many times you're in the situation where you're speaking English while you're teaching the language. You're trying to get the students to talk in the language and represent their thoughts in the language, but you're actually using many times and having to use English, you know, to instruct the students as well. So there are ways to balance those kinds of ways of teaching and approaching this, you know, through curriculum ideas, curriculum objectives. Aims, goals, and objectives in Indigenous education. The question is, what is your vision, you know? because language learning actually should be connected to the broader vision of a community with regard to their purpose for education. Of course, you know, indigenous education, traditional forms of education have always been a form of what today we call sustainable education. They were about sustaining the culture, the people, and the community and the place through time and through generations. So that today, you know, there's this new term that's being used called sustainable education. And that actually is a good term for what we used to do, you know, as Native communities. In our forms of traditional education, our traditional forms of education, indeed, were about sustaining, you know, the people, community, place through time. And so this idea of sustainability, I think, is very important to explore as a way, or as one of the aims, you know, to bring back language into the context of that way of education that sustains, you know, a community, a culture through time. So aspects of indigenous, you know, education include things like language, of course, identity, revitalization, cultural values, cultural affirmation, aspects of spirituality, empowerment, sovereignty, and, you know, where appropriate, you know, aspects of perspectives of religion. But again, those are things that remain in the community and are a part of that instruction that includes language. So the basics, you know, what does indigenous education look like in practice? Making it real, making it exciting, completely involving students in the planning and execution of that curriculum, focusing on the natural curiosity exhibited by the learners, how to value the tradition, how to value perspectives, cultural perspectives. Now, I'm not saying that language programs today aren't doing a lot of this already, okay? All that the curriculum model, you know, that I'm going to show you now does is it helps you to comprehensively plan for all of these kinds of activities, all of these kinds of outcomes to actually happen in a very cohesive way within a language program, okay? So that's all that really curriculum does. It gives you a plan, it gives you a map that you work on. So if we had better connections, you know, I'd take you on a virtual trip, you know. So there's a lot of ways to use, you know, media and also to use computer technologies to take young people into different kinds of what we call virtual worlds. And so, you know, taking a virtual world field trip into a place or into a different time in a tribe's history, taking them into historical events. These are kinds of things that are done, you know, with very effectively with the use of media. You know, taking students on a virtual tour of traditional places, you know, that are used by a community. Intercultural exchange, talking with each other about what experiences they're having as they're taking that visual journey. You know, especially I think language, because language is certainly connected to our indigenous history, that indigenous histories are really important to convey through language learning. You know, when I was at IIA, I was one of the producers of Surviving Columbus, and we introduced that in 1992 as a kind of educational initiative for Pueblo people. It was the first time that Pueblo people themselves told their story about their history. And so I happened to be at the IAIA at that time and in the position to be able to support and fund that work, and also to be a part of the research team. One of the key things that's really obvious in my Native Studies program is that a lot of times our students, not all the time, but many of our students don't know their own tribal histories. And so language, you see, becomes a vehicle for exploring and learning about that tribal history. And so this is what I mean by, using technology to take a look at those things. And of course, we have all sorts of environmental education, how we relate to the land, to its plants, to its animals, to the places in which we live. The environmental issues, which many young people are very, very passionate about changing, about becoming involved with. So here I come to the center of my presentation today. So this is the model I started at IIA about 40 years ago, as a young teacher, and my charge at that time was to create a culturally relevant curriculum, culturally responsive curriculum for engaging young Native students that were going to the IIA at that time to learn about science, at the same time to honor the cultural traditions that they were coming from, and to incorporate, because it's an art school, to incorporate their art interests. Okay, so I was given the assignment actually to create these kinds of curriculum that engage students, through all of these different ways and help them to learn science at the same time. So I started that 40 years ago. And this is the model I used. At that time, I created the model very specifically to address, that issue of Native students at IIA being alienated with regard to the kind of ways that science was being taught to them, and the need for a new kind of curriculum to be created that addressed, their needs in a better way. And so, as you can see, this is called the Zaius Model. It's comprised of aims, goals, and objectives, content, learning activities, evaluation. The foundation that it sits on is the nature of knowledge that you're teaching, some of the societal or cultural factors, including, where students are and how they're being affected by, different kinds of things in a community or in a society, and different kinds of learning theories that you can apply. But the key is to focus on the learner. The learner is is really the one that makes the decisions about what's going to be learned and how it can be best learned. So so that's kind of what we call a Zaius model, and I'll provide that to anyone that has an interest in it. This is what's called the Zaius evaluation materials. Methods and objectives. So why a subject is being taught is one of the first questions. Who is being taught? Who is developing and delivering the curriculum? How a subject is being taught, and what will be achieved by teaching a subject. So these are just ways we talk about curriculum in education, but actually the very simple way to think about curriculum is that it's a plan. It's a plan of how you're going to teach something. So, the Zaius model is an excellent tool. I really recommend it for developing culturally responsive language curriculum. It's composed of 4 parts or 4 pairs of components and foundations, which are interrelated. It allows for a comprehensive understanding and application of curriculum design in a school or community education setting. It's a very easy model to learn. What I really like about it is that as you discuss, the different parts of the model, it really engages you as a community, as a planning group, in deep questions about what you're doing and how you're doing it with regard to the language instruction. That first foundation is epistemology, the guiding philosophy of a curriculum. It describes a culture's view of knowledge. It forms a philosophical foundation for how teacher and learner may approach an educational process. It includes kinds of embedded knowledge, symbols, metaphors, orientations that are cultural in nature. So, each tribe has, we have different linguistic terms that we use. We have different symbols that are important to us, and different kinds of I guess you might say, embedded cultural vessels that carry both the language that the language is talking about and that become really one of the kinds of tools that we can actually use to build curriculum around, okay? Does that make sense? That we have, different kinds of symbols. Like I'll use the Zia sun, okay, which is appropriated by the state of New Mexico but the Zia sun, has great deep meaning, to the Zia people. It's an iconic symbol, okay? And so when you begin to talk about, at least from the community's viewpoint, what that symbol means to them, you use the language, you see, to begin to explore, the nature of that symbol. So you're teaching something that's important for the young people to learn about, to know about, using, a symbol that's already commonly seen. So again, this is a way of using curriculum in that form. Of course, you have to have your aims, goals, and objectives, and that, is about empowering students to take ownership for their education, finding their face, heart, and foundation through what they are learning. So many times, we're wondering why are our language programs not working. A lot of times, we try the best that we can under different circumstances to make the language program work, but we're still losing language, so I think that by more comprehensively focusing on language curriculum planning, we can begin to realize more success, in this context. So addressing principles of language is relevant and creative ways is also, I think, a goal of this kind of planning. We know that our young people are affected, and we are affected by, society. And there are a lot of issues that we don't have very much control over, but nevertheless, that these issues impact us in very particular kinds of ways. And so when doing these kinds of curriculum, you have to take a look at, what's happening to the students, what's happening to the community. What are the kinds of issues that are impacting them? And how are they influencing how the language is being learned, or if it's being learned at all? This goes back to, creating these wonderful, language programs, but again, not having very much effect in terms of changing that language loss. And many times it's because there's external, social factors that are playing out that we haven't considered that are impacting what is actually being learned in those programs. So the other piece is that Native societal and community need, expectations, and contemporary Native culture. So you have all of these different kinds of factors that you need to talk about as you think about curriculum in this way. The next component is called content. Of course, you're using Native perspectives of language and culture. You're also using Western language learning principles. You're also using cultural and community themes and topics for language learning. You're also using interdisciplinary perspectives through art, through social science, literature, and community. So all of these different things are coming into play, as you're thinking about and doing this kind of curriculum. Again, coming back to the learner, Native cultural personality configurations. We Pueblos, we can tell when someone is from another Pueblo just by the way they use their hands or by their accent. We have that. So why is that? Why can we tell when someone is from somewhere place else? Is because each community has these unique and subtle kinds of characteristics, okay, that we share, that are shared in the community, you see. And then as you go out and meet other people, you carry with you those characteristics. And so that's why. But what it is basically there's certain cultural personality configurations in terms of language use, in terms of intonation in language, in terms of just behavior and mannerisms that if you're cued into that, you can tell, you can tell. And that's a good thing. That's the uniqueness of each community, and that's an important strength, I think. Field-sensitive learner, that means they learn in groups like this, larger groups. Participatory, collaborative, experiential learning orientations. Affective learning methodology simply means that they have to have a feeling for what they're learning. It has to have meaning to them if they're going to learn it, and that learning is going to stick with them. Students young people are affected by peer psychology all the time. So you're having to watch how the peers are interacting with each other around what is being taught. And then, of course, that community orientation. So these are considerations you see for the learner. Learning activities are lots, there are many different kinds of things you can use in this curriculum model. These are just, Western ideas, brain pattern methodologies. A lot of the new techniques that are coming out are based on the study of the brain. They're actually, the MRIs, you're able to actually photograph the brain when it's thinking, when it's doing something. What's really interesting about that is that, because I studied traditional forms of teaching, they're paralleling what they're saying about how the brain learns the best, parallels how Indigenous people were teaching all along. So there's a connection between those two that's now being verified. Experiential and service learning, community-based research, learning through different senses, learning in high context, community-based learning. These are some of the kinds of, categories of learning activities that can be used in the curriculum like this. And then almost finish. Final, we have a lot of different learning theories. I include in that Indigenous language or Indigenous education as an evolving theory. And in a lot of ways, many Native scholars are actually trying to recapture some of the basic ideas and perspectives and orientations that we once had as Native people and bringing them forward into a contemporary expression. And that's what I call an evolving Indigenous theory of education, something that is actually our own, but in a sense, in a contemporary expression. And so along with that, you have visual philosophy, different kinds of creative learning theories. So learning theory is something that really gives you just some thoughts and perspectives of how to approach what you're doing in the curriculum. And then, of course, we have different kinds of evaluations, the language learning evaluation assessments, teacher assessments, students, administration, community, culturally based assessments. And even here, and I forgot to list it, we're now developing an Indigenous evaluation model that, again, is taking Indigenous metaphors, thoughts, and perspectives and giving, putting them into a context where we can use them as a way to evaluate how we're doing in a language program. And that is now available through AHEC, the American Indian Higher Education Consortium. You can just go to their website, and there's a section there called the Indigenous Education Model. And I really highly encourage, especially for language programs, community language programs, that it gives you a much better tool for exploring how well you're doing, with your program. So I'm going to finish with this. Some key questions for creating technology-oriented curriculum. What is your purpose? What will it take to revitalize or otherwise reclaim an Indigenous language for future generations? Being clear about your purpose and goals for using technology profoundly influences how you choose to structure your curriculum. Who is your audience? What are their characteristics and challenges that must be addressed in your community? Who will use the curriculum? In terms of who's and how you're going to have access to your curriculum, the ages that you're working with, the interests that they have, their comfort with computers, and also their prior knowledge about community, about culture, about themselves. And then to what extent are the best ways to use technology in creative, effective language instruction in your context. So what I want to really emphasize is that curriculum, if it's going to work for a community, really has to come from the community itself. It really has to be tailored around the community itself. The package programs, yes, are useful, you know, because we have a lot of packaged language programs. They're useful, but if you use them by and of themselves, they don't have any of this contexting whatsoever. They can and should be used, but in strategic ways connected to what you've already done as a tailored curriculum. Okay? So that's the big difference. And so I just want to leave you with those thoughts and those perspectives. I think that you know, we're just beginning to really realize how to do language education in better, more comprehensive ways. I've used the Zaius model to teach everything, actually, in my career. You know, when I'm going to teach something new, I'll take out my pad and I'll start to write my own Zaius curriculum so that I understand how and what I'm doing and how I'm going to do it and why I'm going to do it and the different kinds of resources that I can pull into, you know, creating a curriculum that works for my students. And I think it works quite well, and it's very easy to learn. And I think that any tool that we can use, whether it's technology or a curriculum model or the different kinds of resources that we may have available to us within our community, that we have to be open to using them in ways that are creative. And this whole business of comprehensive curriculum modeling, you know, helps us to do that. It gives us signposts. So, you know, in my language, we kunda ha wotsi hiyo ne kipo ajena taratha hawanamu. Bakibo we kunda biwo anyini. Thank you so much for your time and your breath, sharing our breath together, and for giving me this time to address you. As we do this, as you know, all of us in our communities, whether you're a teacher or a community member or language instructor or student, you know, we do this kind of work for what would I say, for the sake of life. You know, that's what Wonyeni means in Tewa. For life's sake, we do this. And so it's not only for our own life, but it's for those future generations that are yet to come. So we cool down. Thank you.